Hi and welcome back to Mini Adventure. Well, I finally got the Mini Cooper running after I changed out the cylinder head, had it machined and everything. Got it all running and everything, but I got a few little codes that keep popping up whenever I run codes on it. And one of the codes that I found is the coolant temperature sensor is reading high on this thing, and which is kind of odd because I replaced the thermostat, which is where the coolant temperature sensor is located. You can't take it out, it's made as part of the thermostat housing. So I thought, well, while I got it all apart, I'll just go ahead and put a new thermostat in there. It comes with new sensors, and then that way I won't have to worry about having any problems with it. But just as my luck would go, it doesn't work. It's throwing off a code right now. I also have the Torque Pro app that I have connected through a Bluetooth adapter onto my phone, and I was driving it around and I would notice that the temperature would climb quite a bit. It would get up to like 240, and then all of a sudden it would drop down to like 180. And originally I thought that maybe that was air bubbles or something that was trapped in the coolant system that was causing it to read that way. But now I realize that I probably got a faulty coolant sensor, and I'll have to take the new one that I bought, I'll have to take it off and put the old one back on. There was nothing wrong with the old one, it was working just fine. Just thought it would be prudent to go ahead and change it out. And so I still kept the old one, and once I get the other one out, we'll do a little side-by-side diagnosis on it. I've already ohmed out the coolant temperature sensor on it, and on the old one, and I'm going to compare it to the new one and see if it's actually a problem with the sensor or what. But let me get everything set up for the next shot, and we'll be right back. But first, I want to mention about safety. Anytime you're working with the coolant system on any vehicle, you want to make sure that you wait until the vehicle is cooled down. Coolant gets very, very hot and it can scald you. The complete entire coolant system on the Mini Cooper is a pressurized system. Even the expansion tank on a lot of older vehicles that have expansion tanks, the expansion tank is not pressurized. On the Mini Cooper it is. There is no radiator cap per se. You fill the radiator through the expansion tank, and it, like I said, it's pressurized. So don't reach over there when you need to add a little coolant to it and thinking that you can just take it off and put some in there while it's still hot, because the steam will escape and it can burn you severely. So be very careful with that. And also be careful when you do drain your coolant that you don't just dump it in the ditch, or don't leave it out, because animals love the smell of coolant and they'll drink it, and it's very, very dangerous for animals, and it's also harmful to the environment. So go ahead and put it back in the container and take it to your local auto parts store that have the facilities to recycle it. And don't just pour it out in the ditch. We used to do that years and years ago, and it's not good for the environment. So just make sure you properly dispose of your coolant. So let me get everything set up for the next shot, and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Now we're ready to go ahead and start taking this thing off to get down to the thermostat housing, which is way down here underneath the high pressure fuel pump. So it's going to take flat tip screwdrivers here and here to get this intake pipe off. This vacuum hose just disconnects here, and then we have to remove this clip, and then this piece will come off right here, and then this hose right here will come off and allow us to get down in there and do a little bit more work. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this clip off. There's a little tooth here. As you pull up on it, disengage it, and it comes right off. And disconnect that from the valve cover. We'll unplug this here. Be careful with that. We don't want to break that vacuum hose. And now we're going to remove the hose clamps that hold the intake pipe to the turbocharger and back here to the map sensor. also that we disconnect this connector here. Now we're able to get a little bit farther down in here and see what we're getting at here. We've got the wiring loom here. So it looks like we're going to have to remove this pipe here, and it'll probably be easier just to go ahead and remove the whole bracket and the map sensor and everything. So we'll be right back. Alright, well, we're back, and on my car, because it was modified, I had to unbolt the bracket here and here that held the map sensor and everything on, and I got that all taken out. And what I'm going to do to get this out of the way is you just grab a hold of it here, disconnect the connector, and you pull it off. And get that vacuum hose out of the way. And now we have to get this wiring harness out of the way. So what we're going to end up having to do is pop this cover off and disconnect the wiring that comes along under here, so that we can lay all this out of the way, and we can actually get to the thermostat housing. So we're starting to uncover it a little bit right now, but we'll have to end up unplugging the high pressure fuel pump here, and we'll unplug the oil pressure sensor here, and we'll have to make sure that we can able to lay this wiring harness off to the side. Now it is still connected down here, back down in here. It actually goes to the injectors and all that. So we'll go ahead and get to work on that, and then we'll be right back. Okay, well, we're back, and as you can see, we've gotten everything out of the way here. We've disconnected the sensor here, and there's also a sensor right here that we disconnected. We've got the wiring harness laid back, but we also had to go and remove the wiring harness from the ignition coils and also from the upstream cat right here, and we disconnected the ground wire from here, and then we just laid all of that back. Well, now we've got our thermostat exposed here. We've got this sensor and this sensor here disconnected. Now we've got to drain the coolant and remove all these hoses, and then we'll remove this and we'll put them on the bench, and we'll take some resistance measurements, and we'll compare the new one with the old one, and hopefully we'll be able to find out exactly why this one is reading high according to the computer. And we'll be right back once we get everything set up to do that. Okay, we're back. I finally got the new one out. This is the new one, the one I just took out of the vehicle that I purchased. And here's my old one. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the resistance readings that we get on each of these connectors. We're going to compare these two, and then we're going to compare the two over here that are on the water neck. Now it's important to realize these are just thermistors, and what happens is as the water temperature rises, the resistance goes down, and the computer sees that resistance. It knows that at a certain temperature is a certain resistance. So what I was seeing on my Torque Pro app was that the temperature would go up, and then all of a sudden it would drop way down. And the BMW DIS version 5.7 software that I was running was showing a coolant temperature sensor signal high on that when it would run the quick test. So what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna check these, and here's my meter. I'll set this up so hopefully you can see it in the camera there. I'll try not to. All right. So we're going to check from pin to pin, there's only 2 pins in there. And see, on the old one we got 7.15K, and on the new one we're showing 6.63K on this sensor. Now if we turn it over to this sensor, which is the coolant temperature sensor, and I'll have to turn these around here so I can get in there and you guys can see the meter. On the old one, gotta be real careful not to let your leads touch when you get in there. I'm using a light so that I can see. Okay, we're reading 11.2 ohms on the old one, and on the new one we're reading 16.2. And this is the coolant temperature sensor right here. So this sensor is reading higher than this one, which would corroborate what the computer was seeing. It's looking for a lower ohm signal coming from this thing when it's cold. And it's not. It's seeing a higher signal than it's supposed to. So I'm going to go ahead and put this thermostat housing back in the vehicle, and I'm going to return this one since it's defective. And the reinstallation is just the reverse of how you saw taking it apart. What I'm going to do, if you can see on this pipe right here, this is the one that actually goes to the turbocharger coolant line. So I'm going to, before I fasten everything in there, I'm going to slip that hose on here, because it's pretty tough to put on, because that turbo coolant line is rigid, so it's real hard to get that line off. So I'm going to make sure I slip that on there first before I actually bolt this down. I'm going to go ahead and get the new gaskets and O-rings out of my head gasket set that I didn't need to use because I put the new one on. I'm going to go ahead and change those out, and then I'll pull everything back on and put it all back together, and then hopefully that'll clear that fault that I was having. But as you can see, it's not terribly difficult to change out the thermostat housing on here. So just make sure that you get a good high quality thermostat housing. I mean, I got this one off of eBay. It wasn't the cheapest one I could find, but it wasn't the most expensive one either. It's not genuine mini, so sometimes that can come back to bite you. But I'm going to go ahead and change out the gasket and O-ring, get this thing put back together, and then we'll see what happens whenever we fire it back up. I'll run the BMW DIS on it again and see if it clears that fault. And once I get all that done, I'll be back to show you guys the results. Alright, well, welcome back. We've got everything put back together now, ready to fill it up with coolant. And one of the things I wanted to point out is down here where my screwdriver is, if you look down in here, there'll be a little screw down in there, and that's your bleeder screw. And you have to loosen that up, and as you're pouring the coolant into your coolant tank, if you'll remember, this is a closed system, so you fill it through the expansion tank, and as you're filling it up, you'll hear it gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. That's the air bubbles coming up through the expansion tank, and also you'll hear a little bit of air coming out of here. But you want to leave this bleeder screw open until you see coolant start coming out without any air bubbles. Then once you've done that, then you know you've got all the air bubbles off, and you go ahead and close that up, and then you go ahead and fill your coolant reservoir tank up to the max line, which is right here where the case, middle of the case is. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to get this thing filled up, and we'll log into it, and we'll check and see if that coolant temperature sensor high fault is gone.